and getting completely blindsided comes down to a single legal tool most people don't even know they can use. Welcome to the Conscious Divorce Podcast on WGSN-DB Radio. Today I'm talking with Becky Sampson, better known as Becky Brockovich. That nickname isn't just cute, she earned it. 21 court hearings, 21 subpoenas, 3.5 years in the Hawaii family court system, 5 opposing attorneys, and for most of it, she represented herself. She didn't just survive, she won a fair and equitable outcome, and she kept her integrity intact while doing it. Now she runs Only Subpoenas, a specialized service helping attorneys get the financial records, employment documents, and evidence they need so that their clients stop settling blind. Today, we're covering what subpoenas actually are, why they matter when assets are hidden or income is murky, and how to shift from reacting emotionally to thinking strategically. But here's a quick disclaimer. Before we dive in, I want you to know I am a certified divorce coach, not a therapist, lawyer, mediator, or CPA. The insights and information shared on this podcast are for educational and information purposes only. Every divorce situation is unique, and what works for one person may not work for another. I also encourage you to seek personalized service from a qualified professional who can address your specific circumstances and the jurisdiction that you live in. What we share here is meant to inspire, inform, and support you on your journey, but it should complement, not replace, professional guidance tailored to your individual needs. So let's get into it. Becky, let's start at the beginning. You went through 21 hearings, issued 21 subpoenas, faced 5 different attorneys, and represented yourself for most of 3.5-year divorce in Hawaii family court. How did you go from someone just trying to get through divorce to earning the nickname Becky Brockovich?
Well, that's a great question. So thanks so much for having me on, Justin. I'm so glad to be on your podcast now. And I'm excited about where you're going and doing with all this stuff. So what kind of got me into this is I really didn't even know a lot about the court system. I've been married twice, actually, divorced twice, and married for the 3rd time, happily married. But my first divorce, I didn't even see a judge. I didn't see an attorney, nothing. We just went and signed off on a settlement and off we went. But the second divorce was something that was totally unexpected. So I was with him for less than 2 years. And when we started the divorce case, he immediately got an attorney, and I didn't have the funds because of the way that it was for me to be able to get an attorney. So I was scrambling, trying to figure out everything. And I had a really good friend of mine who had been to court several times, and he's like, Becky, you can do this. And I'm like, what? I can't do this. Like, I just can't. And at the time I was 7, I was getting my degree in peace building, mediation, and conflict resolution. And I had 7 classes of college at the time that I was preparing my documents for divorce, because he was planning on leaving Hawaii, and I knew that I needed to serve him before he left. So I scrambled to find the resources that I could to be able to draw up everything and serve him divorce papers. But I had no idea that was going to start a 3.5-year court case. And every time I just learned little by little about the process, discovery, and then motions to compel and all kinds of fun stuff, until one day his attorney subpoenaed me for a bank record that he never even asked for. I would have just given it to him. And I was working with an attorney through self-help at the time that said, I have too many load. I mean, my load case was too high. So he's like, I can't represent you, but I can mentor you. I said, hey, if you'll mentor me, just tell me if I'm on the right track, point me in the right direction. But when I got that subpoena, he said, hey, great news. Now you have the template on how to do a subpoena. So go for it. And at that time, I had already gone through the discovery, already asked for permission for all the stuff, and he hadn't been able to provide it for me. So then I taught myself how to do subpoenas. And then of course it evolved from there. I started seeing that subpoenas are a little bit tricky, but I'm a very detailed person. And so they ended up working in my favor, because all I wanted was just the information. That's all I wanted, so that I could settle for a fair and equitable division. And that wasn't something that was provided to me. So I was like, okay, I'll go get it.
We're working as a divorce coach. What I see happening often are people show up for mediation or court and they don't have the information. They don't know their numbers. They don't know what the marital estate is worth. And I didn't really understand until I went through my own divorce how important the subpoena process is. And I give you a lot of credit. I think you earned Becky Brockovich, because you were extremely resilient, and not many people can do what you did.
Right.
But it's important to know that subpoenas are an important tool to get information, especially if you think your soon to be ex is hiding something. So can you kind of break down in everyday language what a subpoena is and what it's used for, and how it can help through divorce proceedings to get what you call a fair and equitable settlement?
Yeah. So let me just first start off with saying I'm not an attorney. So this is not legal advice. It's just, in general, I'll just kind of tell you what my story and what I was able to do. And like I mentioned, the only reason why I really knew the template for the subpoena was because I was subpoenaed. So I'm actually a graphic designer. And so I threw it into one of my Illustrator, which is not a word processing, but I did the margins the same and all of that kind of stuff. And then it was the attorney that helped me to formulate it and be able to serve it the correct way. Like there's a process when it comes to subpoenas. So back to the question that you ask is, what is a subpoena? A subpoena is a court order, and there's only two ways in order to get a subpoena issued. They call it issuing. One is if you're self-representative, or if you're pro se or representing yourself, you have to go to, and it may be different in different jurisdictions, but in Hawaii, I had to go down to the courthouse and actually have a court clerk sign off on it. Once it was signed off by a court clerk, now it's a legal document now I can serve it on the attorney and then the organization that I needed the paperwork from. If you're working with an attorney, the attorney has the power to sign that court order. It's basically a court order. And then the other thing that you asked me is when do you use it? Well, I typically don't tell people to, at least for me, I didn't start off with subpoenas because it's kind of more of an aggressive move. And you really want to do the best that you can to settle. However, it got to the point where I had done discovery. I had done motion to compel, meaning I take him to court and say, look, he's not giving me the information I needed. So then I asked for more discovery, and they weren't responding again to that. And I was like, look, I can waste all my money and all my time, especially I'm still a full-time student in college, and with all these hearings, and go back and forth and back and forth. But he's obviously not willing to give me the information. And so I just started subpoenaing all the records that I knew were out there that I needed in order to build my case, to go, okay, this is, now I have all the information. There's no more hiding. And when it got down to it, finally, after several years, there was no hiding anymore, and he had to settle. And it was the very thing that I believe got me a fair and equitable division. I don't know if he would say it was fair and equitable, but I did settle for what was less than rightfully mine, because I just, at that point, I was okay with it. But it was the leverage that I needed to get what was fair and equitable.
It's interesting, especially with narcissist clients. I hear this sometimes, the other spouse is a narcissist, and that word gets thrown around a lot. But
Yep.
There are cases where, the soon to be ex will not provide documentation. Mm-hmm. So, if you have a subpoena, it's got more teeth, and there's something about, being served and, having this document and just the terminology of subpoena. Can you talk about what would happen if someone doesn't comply with the subpoena? Why does it have teeth?
Well, so some people get this mixed up, because it's funny, because they'll call me on their case and they're like, if I put a subpoena, how is he going to be able to provide that information? I'm like, no, you're not subpoenaing your spouse. You're subpoenaing, let's say Chase Bank. you're subpoenaing Chase Bank where the records are held, whether it's a bank account or whether it's a credit card or whether it's whatever the information that you're needing, you're going straight to that organization. And typically, it's a 2-week, 3-week thing, and you're subpoenaing them. It's a court order. So they don't want to be in non-compliant of a court order. So they're going to comply and give you the information. And a lot of people think, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that I could subpoena. Like, one of the things that I subpoenaed in my case was a little unusual, was his 28 years, all of his paperwork as being a police officer. And people will be like, well, what does that have to do with your divorce? Well, it did have something to do with my divorce, because he ended up taking a job in Hawaii under false pretense, and I needed to be able to prove that. So that's not normally a divorce thing, but, a subpoena is, I basically just looked through my case and was like, okay, here's what I have to say. Here's my defenses. And here's what the story that I need to tell, and what's the information I need, documentation, to be able to tell that story. And then who holds that documentation is who I would subpoena.
And I think it's also really important for people to understand it's not just financial information. It
Right.
can be related to conduct. So you could subpoena Delta for things like frequent flyer points, or, if you suspect your, soon to be ex is having an affair, people do stupid things. And sometimes on their Sky Miles account, they'll book a ticket for themselves and, the person they're supposedly having an affair with. And, it really helps you with conduct. I had a client who subpoenaed Delta for Sky Mile points because their soon to be ex wouldn't disclose how many points they had. And they had almost 3 million points. And that has real value. Other cases are you can subpoena the company that they work for to find out the value of their accrued vacation. And in some cases, that could be worth, 6 figures. So I think it's a really, really smart strategy.
And crypto is also something that's really, really hot right now. And it's interesting. I had somebody on my podcast about crypto, and I have another guy that's coming on crypto. They're like, can you subpoena? Well, of course you can subpoena the crypto. And usually there's a lot there that people don't even have any clue how to find. But I like what you said is that now there is something though in the court system. And again, I'm not an attorney, but there is something that is called phishing. So you have to be careful that you're not fishing for information just because you want the information. It has to be relevant, because a subpoena can be quashed, which means you put the subpoena out there and the other opposing attorney can then file a quash, meaning like stop it from you being able to get the information. So you have to be careful what you do. You don't want to tick off judges or the legal system. So, again, it's strategic. And I only do subpoenas for attorneys, because I'm not an attorney and I'm not a paralegal. My job is just to make sure that they get done properly and don't get rejected, because they are a lot of very detailed work. And it's not that attorneys can't do them. It's just, I have found that it's very detailed work that they don't have the time. They have a lot of other things on their plate. And so it's a lot easier for them to offload those things.
Yeah, so if you're watching this and you're going through divorce, or you're giving advice to someone, in some cases we have an attorney who's a sole practitioner who has multiple clients, bringing someone like Becky on board to do this really important work is critical, because you can really, uncover things that, you might not know about. So, on the topic of kind of crypto and hidden assets, I'm kind of curious, what are the most common ways financial information gets buried or disguised in divorce, and how do subpoenas uncover what someone is trying to hide?
Well, first of all, what people don't realize is that you can do one subpoena and it opens up a whole nother door to like, oh, I didn't know that they had this account, right? Or this credit card, or I didn't know that they transferred the money over to an organization, or maybe they cashed money out. You have to be able to prove, that's called marital waste. Especially like people freak out. They're like, oh my gosh, they just took $30,000 out of the bank account. What do we do? And I'm like, well, you need to have that information and the time. The nice thing about paperwork in banks is that typically you can't hide the transaction. I mean, it happens. It's right there in black and white. So you just need to be able to find it, and then it will allow you the opportunity to go there. So where do people hide things? Cash is really hard to track. That's just really hard. However, I was just having a conversation with a financial planner, like literally before we came on a minute ago. And I said, why do you think attorneys don't do subpoenas more? And they just said, well, it takes too long. And she was telling me which by the way is not true. It can take as little as 2 weeks to 3-4 weeks, for them to produce the information, not months. But she was telling me about a situation where this one guy literally, I think it was $1.5 million that he not only took out, but then he completely blew it on something, right? And normally when there's money that's been taken out, you can easily go to the court and say, well, that's marital waste and that comes out of his half. But she didn't have any other money. There was no other money to draw on. So basically she was out of that $1.5 million. Now I'm not giving people ideas of what to do, but it definitely, that's the reason why I think subpoenas are easier to get involved quicker in the process. If you do suspect that person's going to be difficult. I've even had some attorneys say, look, we don't even ask for permission. Like we don't even do the discovery. We just go straight into subpoenas. And I was like, oh, I mean, how do the courts feel about that? And like, oh, we love it. It makes the court case go faster. So, I mean, it's something that you have to look at in your jurisdiction of how the court likes to have it, whether you go through that due diligence of doing the discovery and then, but I just found that you can really get stuck in the system. And the other thing to be careful of, to be honest with you, Justin, is that you have to be careful that you get that information, subpoenas and discovery done before the deadlines, because once there's deadlines, you no longer can, people get in trouble all the time that way. There's deadlines that they come up against and you no longer can do any discovery, and then you can't do subpoenas either. It's like, what? So you have to be careful.
I think there's a perception that, pursuing a subpoena is always to see if someone's hiding something or not being truthful, or if they don't give the information, it's another way to get it. Mm-hmm. I just want people to know also, if you have suspicion that your ex is doing some shady stuff, getting subpoenas can kind of confirm in some cases that they're not. And if that's the case, then that gives you some good information from a negotiation standpoint. And you have to stop being, on guard that they're doing shady stuff, and then kind of go to the next step, which is, figure out what sort of settlement, you can put together.
Yeah. And you want to, obviously you want to be strategic about it too, and not come from a place of like, I'm going to go get them. You know what I mean? Because that's always going to backfire. But I know for me in my case, I was always just like, look, I just want the information. And there was actually an attorney I talked to the other day that said that he subpoenaed bank records because from his own client, because the client couldn't get them. You know what I mean? Like, so he's just like, what, let's just go the easy route. Let's go subpoena and get them.
Just a side piece of information that's really helpful is, I read a study a couple days ago. I have to figure out which study it is and have to give it to you, Becky, because it's helpful. But they say people who prepare, which really means you have the information, end up saving 30 to 40% on their legal fees because they know the numbers, they have the information. And when it comes time to mediate, they know what they need, they know what's available, and then, they can hopefully find a negotiated agreement that, both parties can walk away with.
Yeah. And that is a really good point, because if you do the heavy lifting, you do the best that you can to come up with the numbers. And a statistic I know is 44% of women coming out of divorce end up in financial poverty. I always say, not on my watch. And I truly believe it's because most women, and I hate to say that like an absolute, because there are definitely men that get like my husband now was left with 21 cents in the bank because he didn't have anything to do with the finances. And so when we did the forensics, we found there was a lot of stuff there that he did not know. So it doesn't just happen to women, but it's very important to know your numbers. And if you want to save yourself money, you've got to be willing to do the digging and be willing to do the harder work so that you're doing that heavy lifting for the attorney. You're not paying them to do it because they don't know and they're not as invested as you are. They're not the ones that have lived your life. I happen to know where most everything was, or at least the name. This is one more thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of people think that they can't subpoena because I don't know the bank number. I don't know. I'm like, you don't need the bank number, the account number to subpoena something. So, I just want people to know that if you have the little bit of information, their name and their social and birthday, you typically can find those things. So,
can you talk a little bit about how subpoenas can be helpful for depositions, in terms of attorneys preparing for depositions?
So a deposition is usually, again, I'm not an attorney, but I'll explain to you my experience because a deposition is really under oath. An attorney without a judge can interview the opposing party or whatever. They have a whole bunch of questions and then it is considered under oath, right? So how does subpoenas help with depositions? Honestly, in my opinion, they're getting all the information and then they're questioning the other side. Why is this transfer? What about this transfer? What about that? So it gives them information to then build their questioning around.
Okay.
But yes. Sorry.
All right, we are back with the Conscious Divorce podcast on WGSN-DB radio. So Becky, what are the biggest mistakes you see attorneys or their clients make when it comes to subpoenas, either using them wrong or not using them at all?
So this is another really great question because, again, I was having a conversation today with an actual financial forensics. And I asked her this question. I'm like, why do you think attorneys aren't using subpoenas more? And she says, honestly, they take too much time. They're too much money. They're too, and I said to her, what's interesting to me is that my experience with subpoenas, it takes a couple of weeks, 2, maybe 3 weeks. So I've had a lot of people recently come to me and say, my attorney is telling me that it's been 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, and we haven't got the paperwork back. And I'm thinking, well, when you send out a court order and you give them a time limit, usually is 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks that you're giving them, and they're not getting the paperwork back to them, that's a follow-up issue. So that is something, and again, I don't fault divorce attorneys because divorce attorneys are literally to the brim stressed. They've got so much on their plate, and even their paralegals are overworked because there's just so many details, and then you're dealing with the emotional side of their clients. So I don't blame them. However, subpoenas require a lot of detail and follow-up work. And that's another reason why I truly believe that they need to outsource it to an expert like Only Subpoenas, because we do all the follow-up. We do make sure that the timeline's done correctly. We make sure that all the paperwork's back. And if there's something, and we build the relationship, let's say Chase Bank again, right? So I have an actual person at Chase Bank that I call. So say, hey, we sent this subpoena, we got this back, but we're still missing this, which doesn't happen often, but it will happen at times. And the attorney doesn't have to worry about it. They don't have to, they just need the information. So it's one of those things. I know I mentioned this to you before, Justin. I'm a graphic designer. I can do my own production on my podcast, and I have for a long time, but should I be doing it? No. So that's what I say about with attorneys too, is that that's one of the biggest mistakes that they make, is it thinking, oh, even one of my clients that hired me the other month, she's like, yeah, we did this subpoena and it got rejected. And she goes, would you have caught it? And I'm like, yeah, that wouldn't have gotten rejected. So it's just a matter of trusting and outsource to be able to support them through that. I think that's one of their biggest, and oftentimes they'll just be like, well, it takes too long, or we don't want to do it. And then meanwhile, it takes a lot longer to get their case through. And the clients, to be honest with you, will call me and be like, Becky, I just want them done. And I'm like, I know. And we can't do them without the attorney. So
so that's a perfect lead into my next question. So divorce is emotional. People are exhausted, angry, heartbroken, sometimes all at once. How do you help someone shift from reacting emotionally to thinking strategically, especially when a subpoena can feel aggressive or adversarial, but really be helpful to their case?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I've been doing life coaching for 17 years. And so I think anytime, and I'm human too. I always say, if you cut me, I bleed. I react. I've also, you back me up in a corner and I'm going to come fighting, right? But anytime somebody's in that panic mode, or I can hear it in their voice that they're just like, I want to go get him, and I want to get this, and I want to get that, and whatever. That kind of energy is you're never going to win in the end. So it really is whatever you need to do self-care wise to get yourself. For me, it was walking on the beach. Like, I can't even tell you how much time I spent walking on the beach before my hearings. I mean, I went to 21 hearings, which is ridiculous because we had no kids. We were married less than 2 years. I mean, it just wasn't, but that was the way that I handled myself to make sure that I was coming to the hearing or the interaction with him or his attorney at the greatest, my strongest self that I could come to. So if somebody came to me and was all over the place, I'd say, okay, what do you need to do to take care of yourself right now? Because your mental state is more important. I mean, I even have a client right now. She was texting me early this morning while I was in the gym. And I was like, what are you doing up? Because I know she doesn't get up early. And she goes, oh, I haven't even gone to sleep. And we're working on a project. And I said, you need to go to sleep now. Like, she goes, but Becky, do you think I can wait for like an hour and get it? No, you're going to sleep now. Because if you don't take care of you, then it doesn't matter how many subpoenas are out there, and it doesn't matter how many hearings you go to, or you're going to frustrate everyone and not be able to think straight. And it's normal. Like, my client always says, Becky, I'm not normally like this. I'm like, I get it. I've been there. I've been there twice. So I get it, and breathe, just come down to, whether you need to go take a sleep or a walk or listen to music. For me, and the ocean of music were like, that was my healing place. And then I'd come back stronger.
Well, this has been awesome. Becky, if there was one more piece of information that you want our listeners to hear and to know, what would it be?
I always love when I'm getting that question, because I through my life experience, I have come to realize that every single one of us matter. So if that's something that, even in my case, when I finally turned my case over to an attorney and I was trying to prove to him all the reasons why I was entitled to, my share of the half of the increase. And he said, I'm going to stop you right there, Becky. And she goes, he said to me, I don't care if you sat on a couch, ate bonbons, and gained 100 pounds, you are still entitled to half of the increase because you were a part of it. You don't need to justify. And I said to him on the phone, I said, thank you so much for not making me have to feel like I have to prove my very existence as part of this equation. And I was very proud of that because it is true. I mean, especially with moms, sometimes when they've raised kids and they don't feel like, or maybe they're in a toxic relationship made to feel like they didn't contribute. But every single one of us matters on both sides, not just one. Both people matter in this equation. And so that's why I'm so for going for a fair and equitable division. Just be fair.
And I love that. And I love the whole mantra of you matter. I've been using it for years in the mental health space. So as we wrap this up, I just want to remind everyone, you have more power in your divorce than you probably realize. But power only works if you use it and if you have the right information. Subpoenas aren't about being aggressive. They're about being prepared. They're about refusing to settle blind. And as Becky's story proves, they can be the difference between getting what's fair and walking away wondering what you've missed. If you're working with an attorney, ask them, are we using a subpoena and how? What records should we be requesting? If they don't have a good answer, pay attention to that. And here's a reminder. This episode is for education, not advice, or at least from me. We're not attorneys, therapists, or financial advisors. Please connect with qualified experts to learn more about the specific rules and laws in your jurisdiction. To learn more about Becky's work, visit onlysubpoenas.com. That's ONLY subpoenas.com, or find her podcast, Divorcing Strong, wherever you listen. If today's episode resonated with you and you're looking for support as you navigate your divorce or separation, I invite you to learn more about my practice, Reclaim and Reboot Divorce Coaching. I work with individuals who are ready to transform their divorce from a breakdown into a breakthrough, helping you reclaim your power, reboot your life, and become the best version of yourself, your You 2.0. I've also written 2 books to support your journey. You 2.0, Divorce, A Better Way Forward, which offers a comprehensive roadmap for navigating divorce with intention and purpose, while the You 2.0 workbook provides practical exercises and tools that help you do the deep work of transformation. Both are available on Amazon.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to The Conscious Divorce and leave us a review. It helps other people going through similar experiences find the support they need. And thank you to WGSN-DB Radio for streaming us live today. To connect with me directly, go to my website at www.reclaimandreboot.me and set up a free 30-minute, no-obligation consultation. I'd love to talk to you about where you are in your journey and how I can support you as you move forward to this next chapter in your life. And remember, your family doesn't end when you divorce, but it does change shape. And with the right support and mindset and tools, you can create a future that's even brighter than you imagined. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep moving forward. Thank you.